My dad for you guys to be here, and it means a lot to us. Thank you for coming and sharing your memories and just your well wishes and condolences. So I wrote some things I wanted to read in honor of my dad. And I'm just going to read them right off the paper because I don't know if I'm going to stay on the rails. But when I finish, if you guys want to share anything with the group, please feel free. If not, just you guys being here and talking with each other and talking to us is enough. So thank you. I'm gonna start. So I've never written a eulogy before, but I wanted to do a good job because it's for my dad. So I Googled how to write one. Suggestions offered in the online articles I read differed in their opinions as to the length and structure of a eulogy. But one thing they all agreed on is that however you went about it, it should be honest and come from the heart. So I decided that first and foremost, this document should be from my heart. But aside from the advice about talking from the heart, I didn't bother taking notes on any of the other things the article said. So if this sounds like a poorly edited TED Talk, my apologies. Rather than worrying about composition, I needed this to be about the things in my heart and the things I would want my dad to hear if he were here right now. So I set about trying to write something from the heart and speak on the man who had such a huge influence on my life. And yet I felt there was a lot I didn't know about his life. I mainly knew him as Paul Jackson, my dad, and it was only toward the end of his life that I started to know him as Paul Jackson, the man. That feeling was confirmed as I began talking to his friends and acquaintances and my own family, and they shared their own stories and feelings about him. And through that process, I think I understand him more now than I ever did when he was alive. I wish that understanding had come sooner, but I'm grateful that it came late rather than never. One of the things that occurred to me shortly after his death is that Paul probably missed his calling in life as a teacher. For one, because one of his credos was, if you're going to do something, do it right, which I heard many times in my life. But more than that, Dad absolutely loved sharing information on the topics he cared about most. Several days after my thoughts about teaching occurred to me, my wife Becky and I were cleaning out his office, and I was happy to find a document from earlier this year. Dad had been certified as a youth educator through the Nebraska Walleye Association, so we could teach fishing to kids. So my suspicion on his calling seems to have merit. Therefore, in the spirit of Paul Jackson as a teacher, certainly one of the most important teachers in my life, I want to share, after a lifetime of instruction from him, the last 3 lessons my father taught me. So lesson 1. As I said before, my father loved talking about the things that interested him. He had many interests. He loved food from all cultures and cuisines and loved to cook. He loved history, especially colonial American, traveling, sports, especially hockey. But the big 3 topics for him, to my mind, were always music, hunting, and fishing. Those 3 subjects were constantly present in my dad's activities, but in fairly equal measure. So you might ask what he loved most in life, music, fishing, or hunting. After thinking about it the last few weeks, I would say none of the above. The thing he loved most in life was people. My father used music, hunting, and fishing to connect with the world around him, to spend time with his family, to reconnect with old friends, and to make new ones. He never did any of his hobbies alone. When he cooked a new recipe, it was for someone else to try. When he listened to music, he wanted someone with him to talk about it. He was never content practicing guitar by himself. He wanted to be up on stage with a band. And hunting and fishing trips were always family and friend events. Even when every so often he did go fishing alone, he would find other fishermen and strike up conversations about where the best spots were, what bait the fish were biting at, and he would come away with both new knowledge and a new potential friend. I did not know my father's parents, and I don't know much about them, but from what I understand, it was not a warm household. Not a lot of affection or family time or even socialization. I think my dad compensated for how he grew up by using these activities to spend time with the people he cared about. He didn't talk about his emotions or love much, and he definitely was not a hugger. But he would spend time with you whether you wanted to be on that damn fishing boat or not. This was his love language. I think because of how Dad grew up, where family time was nil and holidays weren't even celebrated, these things became very important to him. He loved family togetherness activities as we grew up. Christmases, birthdays, road trips, and camping. It was very important to him that we did things together. I recall that he absolutely loved to surprise my sister and I to a maddening degree. The joy he received from never telling us what was in store, or tricking us into thinking we were doing something else, only to pull a last-minute plot twist, it was almost maniacal, but looking back, I find it endearing. I think because he never got to be the kid whose eyes were full of surprise and joy, opening a present on Christmas morning, he always wanted to see that look on the faces of Katie and I, and he went to great lengths to make it happen as much as possible. I recall that, whether taking us to see the original Star Wars movies, or going to amusement parks, or even going out for pizza, these things were shrouded in mystery and subterfuge to my constant objections as a child. But despite our pestering and interrogation of our father on what his plans were, he never ever relented on keeping up the act. And he was always rewarded as our pent-up frustrations gave way to elation when our destination and activity was finally revealed. Though looking back, this probably explains my poor sense of direction, because I grew up never knowing where the hell we were going until we got there. So too, as I used to complain about surprises, I also, as kids do, complain about all the activities. Whether it was being held hostage with his record collection, and listening to him talk about what session players sat in on an old rock song, or getting drug out of bed at 5 a.m. to go walk a hedgerow for quail in the freezing cold, or being made to go on fishing trips, which I think Katie enjoyed because she was good at it, but I hated because I was born a lousy fisherman and couldn't get a fish out of water with a hand grenade. My father made sure we spent time together, and I would very subtly grumble about it, but always complied to make him happy, until my late teens, where I started missing hunting trips because teenagers don't like to drag themselves out of bed at 5 a.m. I felt this way most of my life, and even complained to Becky a few months ago about always having to do the activities my father liked. Still grumbling like a teenager after all these years. Until a few weeks ago when all of my feelings changed. About a week before Dad died, he had started texting old pictures to our family chat group. Old hunting and fishing pictures with the family, just to reminisce, and one picture caught my attention. I had seen the picture a few times throughout the years and never really thought much about it, but it struck me this time. It was a picture of my dad and I when I was about 17, after a day of dove hunting. After each hunt, we would get a picture of he and I and all the birds we had caught. And I don't remember that particular day, but it seemed like a pretty good one. There were a lot of birds laid out in front of us in the photo. And my dad was grinning ear to ear. Maybe the happiest I had ever seen him. But he wasn't looking at the birds, he was looking at me. And after 46 years, the thought finally hit me. Maybe the hunting trips weren't about hunting, or the fishing about fishing trips. That is when I started to realize everything I had just told you, that my dad loved his hobbies, but he loved us more. Sharing them was his love language. Realizing that changed my perspective on so much of our time together, and I wish I had understood these things sooner. I wish in my teen years, when he turned on the light of my bedroom to get me up for hunting, that I hadn't groaned and thrown a pillow over my head and gone back to sleep. I wish I had gotten up and gone with him. Those extra few hours of sleep seem so insignificant now in comparison of having a few more memories of spending time with my father. I think it's true of anyone that we can look back on our lives and see those missed opportunities, and I know that I certainly can, but I know that whenever I look at that picture of my dad and I, we did okay. So lesson 1, share the things you love with the people you love. Share the things that they love, and share the crappy things that they're going through too, just so they don't have to go through them alone. If the choice is between getting up at 5 a.m. or sleeping in and missing out, get the hell out of bed. The point is, Choose to spend your time on the people that deserve it most, because in the end, time is the only thing that none of us will ever have enough of, and it's the most valuable thing we can give. Lesson 2, maybe 2 weeks before my dad died, while I was sitting with him in the hospital, he and I had a talk, a heart-to-heart conversation, the one you're supposed to have before someone dies, where you talk about the things that matter, clear the air, and tell each other that you love them. I did not want to have this conversation because it's a hard one to have, and I was still trying to hold on to the belief that my dad was going to get over this, and despite what people tell me about humans and death, my father was going to live forever. But he made us have it anyway. I'm grateful to him that he did. We talked about our lives and our relationship. We talked about regrets for mistakes we felt we'd made, not only with each other in our own relationship, but just in life. It was a very honest discussion where we put everything on the table and we were seeing each other for who we were without defenses or anger or blame. I think the surprising thing about that conversation is that it wasn't so much about forgiving each other, because we found that we had already forgiven each other for everything before a single word had been said in that conversation. Maybe in the end it was more about giving each other permission to forgive ourselves. So I feel unfortunate that my father required one last mandatory conversation. Because I realized I don't have any anger about mistakes Dad specifically made with me in our relationship. Because we'd forgiven each other, we love each other, and I can see myself in those mistakes, and I can learn from them as a father to my own kids. And I don't have any sorrow about the mistakes Dad said he made in his life, or any other regrets he had over them. Because the pain we carry for our own mistakes is part of the cost of living, and we all pay it, and Dad's pain is over. So I won't carry on any regrets about his life on his behalf. I'll just be grateful that he lived and celebrated. So the second lesson is, have those important conversations with the people you love and don't wait. And most of all, be willing to forgive and forgive yourselves. Life is too short to let it stand in the way of connecting with the people that you love. And the third lesson, you all may or may not know that earlier this year, my father at 75 years old bought a boat. A 1978 Lund 14-foot fishing boat, 45 years old, with the hull banged up all to hell, no seats, and a broken motor. I think maybe people who heard this may have thought it was foolish. I admit that I did, though I never said anything about it to him. Because when Paul Jackson's mind was made up, you couldn't convince him of anything. And it really seemed like he viewed it as his last hurrah, and who is anyone to tell a person they can't have one? He was in his mid-70s with diabetes, multiple bypass surgeries under his belt, and advanced COPD. He didn't have the health, the time, or the money to restore a boat anymore. This was a fool's quest. And I felt that way until after he died. Until I went to his house to start cleaning out his things, and I was surprised and humbled to realize exactly how much work had been done on that boat before he got really sick. The boat's hull had been repaired, new seats put in, the motor had been fixed, polished metal and bright orange paint. At that moment I stopped thinking that the boat was a foolish toy. It became a thing of beauty to me, Paul Jackson's own Rocinante. And as I examined the boat and started going through his fishing gear, his plan no longer seemed silly to me. It became the most fiercely defiant, stubborn-headedly epic display of optimism I've ever witnessed. Knowing himself how much the chips were stacked against him in the health department, and that time might be running out, I began to suspect that he was planning one last adventure. I imagine his plan was that when he knew it was close to the end, he would get up early while it was still dark, hook the boat to his Jeep, and drive out to some unnamed fishing hole, because I'm convinced he knew all the lakes in Nebraska, whether they're on a map or not. He'd arrive quietly, put the boat in the water before the sun had even risen, and then he'd fight the battle of his life with a giant walleye coming out of the murky depths, just as big as that one fishing boat. And the battle would last all day until sunset. Would Dad or the walleye win? Who knows? But we never hear from him again. He and his monster fish would just disappear in a local legend. You might say that this is just a fantasy that a son made up to make the end of his father's life seem more grand. You might even say that my theory is a display of fiercely defiant, stubborn-headed optimism, to which I would simply say thank you. But I say to you that the evidence is on my side. I have pictures of the fixed-up boat ready for the water. I have his fishing bag that was sitting in his garage, fully loaded with tackle boxes. His fishing rods at the ready. No one will ever convince me otherwise. So the third lesson is, if you have a dream and everyone says you can't do it, that you're too old, too sick, not good enough, it's too late, whatever the reason, Paul Jackson's advice to you by way of his son: get out of the recliner on your weary old legs and get out there and repair the hull, fix the motor, and set out onto the water and chase whatever adventure you dream of before you're called to meet your sunset. So these are the last lessons my father taught me, and I am grateful for him to have learned them, and I am better for knowing them. I am better for knowing him. I hope your lives have all been better for knowing him as well.